It helps if I take myself off mute. Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Howard, and I'm the Chief Executive of Lupus UK. I'm sure that we've got loads and loads of people starting to join us now, so I'll just give you a brief introduction, let a few more people join over the next couple of minutes. So thank you for everyone who's joined us already. As you probably know, October is Lupus Awareness Month in the UK, and we've got a lot going on. Despite the fact that coronavirus has put the brakes on the normal activities we would have, we're really pleased to offer things like this virtual event this evening, and we're really pleased and super grateful also for all of the support that we've received over the last few months, but especially during this month as well. We've been blown away by the amount of people who have given generously during this time, still been able to do fundraising events for the charity, being very innovative and imaginative in what they're doing. And just the other week we had the Virgin London Marathon virtually, with loads of people taking part in that for Lupus UK, and so thank you ever so much to everyone who did that. And we've got a lot more virtual events on the way. So number of our regional groups now have started doing virtual support group meetings, and I attended a couple of those over the weekend, and it was lovely to chat to people from different parts of the UK, see how they're getting on, and to share experiences with one another. And we'll have more events like this as well, where you'll have a chance to listen to guest speakers, learn about different topics related to lupus. We'll have loads and loads of information about those coming up over the next few months. So just a little bit of housekeeping for this event. Everyone has their microphone muted and their video off. That's just so that we can accommodate as many people as possible and you'll be able to hear the speakers clearly. If you've got any questions, there is a Q&A section and you can type your questions in there. So please have a look in there. Write any questions or comments, and at the end of the session we'll be asking the questions to our guest speaker, so that you can have any of your burning issues answered on this topic. The talk that we've got is for about 20 minutes to half an hour, and then we'll answer your questions and answer those, and the whole thing will be wrapped up by around 6 o'clock. If you join us late on, or if you have to go and use the loo or get a cup of tea, you can always watch back later. We'll be recording this event and making it available on the Lupus UK YouTube channel and on our website as well. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Marilia, who is our excellent guest speaker from Idorsia Pharmaceuticals, who's going to talk about drug development in lupus.
Thank you, Paul. So thank you everyone joining us this evening for today's webinar. My name is Marilia Pozzobon. I am the project physician for cenerimod, a drug that's being developing for lupus at Idorsia Pharmaceuticals. In this 20-minute presentation, we aim to address a number of questions that Paul indicated would be of interest for the Lupus UK community surrounding the drug development process in lupus. So Idorsia has already had the privilege to work with the Lupus UK to provide public and colleague education about the disease. For example, the ebook on our website was reviewed by Lupus UK and features quotes from members living with the condition to bring real-life experience to the fore. Last Lupus Awareness Day, we also featured an exhibit in our headquarters in Basel, Switzerland, to showcase the stories of people living with lupus, who were identified and introduced via Lupus UK. Idorsia is a biopharmaceutical company located in Switzerland with over 800 highly qualified specialists. Our purpose is to discover, develop, and bring more innovative medicines to patients. Currently, we have 12 compounds in development, and we are investigating a potential treatment for lupus. And here is our pipeline. Starting from the top right, we have in green our most advanced project. This is daridorexant. That is a drug developed to treat insomnia. We have successfully completed the mandatory or pivotal trials, as they are known, that are required to submit a drug for health authorities approval. In pink are our 4 compounds that are in an advanced stage of development called phase 3. Those compounds are being investigated for myocardial infarction, Fabry disease, hypertension, and vasospasms. 3 projects you see in blue are in an intermediate phase of development called phase 2. Our compound to treat lupus in this phase, and hopefully we will succeed to start our phase 3 soon. We also have other projects in early phases of development seen here in purple on the bottom of this slide. So now let's have a look in more details of this phase that some of them I mentioned in my previous slide. The drug development process is a long and expensive process. It takes on average 12.5 years to develop a drug, and it costs approximately £1.15 billion. And these timelines may be longer in a more complex disease areas like lupus. Around 5,000 to 10,000 potential molecules or compounds are needed in order to develop one single medicine that will be approved. You can see how this number decreases as you go through each phase. But even at phase 2 clinical trials, it takes 2 to 5 potential molecules to be tested to achieve one single approved medicine. In the drug discovery phase that you see here in the left, research select a target such as a gene or protein, then search for a molecule or a compound that may act on the target to alter the disease. After that, we move to the preclinical testing, where early safety and efficacy tests are undertaken in models using computers, cells, or animals. The first study in humans are the phase 1. These studies are conducted in about 20 to 100 people. And then the next step of developing is the phase 2 clinical trial. So researchers evaluate the medicine's safety and efficacy in a limited number of patients with the aim of finding the optimal dose or doses for large-scale studies. After results of this first study, a second study with more patients may be needed. As an example, our cenerimod compound had a first phase 2 trial that enrolled 6 to 7 patients with lupus. It was an initial phase 2 study, and now is conducting a more advanced study, still phase 2, with approximately 500 patients. And this is ongoing at the moment, and it's called the CARE study. Following the phase 2, we have the phase 3 clinical trials. So in this phase, researchers study the potential medicine in about 1,000 to 5,000 patients to generate data about safety, efficacy, and overall benefit-risk relationship of the medicine. The phase 3 studies will generate data that will be used in the label of a medicine. When all these studies are completed, we submit a package that includes even the preclinical and the phase 1 and 2 completed trials. And we submit a package to the regulatory agencies. Just an example, the FDA in the USA. And this is for licensing approval. And after that, still another step is required, is the reimbursement. The medicine is now licensed, but it will go through local country value and cost effectiveness assessments before it can be made available to patients. So it is a long process, as you can see. So now let's move on to understanding the immune system and its impacts in lupus. So what we know about lupus and how the immune system affects those living with this condition. It's an autoimmune disease, meaning that the body's immune system malfunctions and attacks by mistake the body's own tissues, causing inflammation and damage. It's systemic, meaning that many different tissues and organs may be impacted by the disease. Is heterogeneous, meaning the symptoms can vary widely from person to person. And it's likely that lupus results from a combination of genetics and environmental. There are a number of risk factors for developing lupus. Women are more likely to develop lupus, and this is probably related to the sex hormones such as the estrogen. It affects people of all ages, but most commonly it's diagnosed between the ages of 15 and 45 years old. Lupus is more common and in African, Hispanic, and Asian descendants. While a person's genes may increase the chance that they will develop lupus, it takes also an environmental trigger to set off the illness or to cause a flare-up. Some potential triggers include sunlight, puberty, childbirth, menopause, and infections. All these factors make lupus a complex puzzle for scientists to research potential treatments for. But scientists like very much a challenge, and there is a lot of exciting progress being made in this field of treatments for lupus. So let's start with the immune system. It's an overview that will help us to understand the pathology of lupus. So the immune system consists of cells, proteins, organs, and tissues. It involves many different defense mechanisms that each work together to protect the body from harmful pathogens such as bacterial, viruses, fungal infections, and parasites. There are external and internal layers of defense. External include physical barriers such as skin, mucous membrane, and nasal hair, just as an example. Internal includes all of our many different immune cells. The immune cells are organized in two systems. The innate system, which is the immunity that we are born with, and the adaptive system, which is the immunity we acquire following a pathogen exposure. So let's review how both the innate and adaptive immune system works. The innate system functions as the first line of defense against infection and generates very rapid, non-specific inflammatory response. It's quick at mounting an immune response to generic threats. The cells of the innate system work in several different ways, and like one example is they give out a net type structure which captures a pathogen by trapping them and marking them for destruction. Another way is a process called degranulation, where a cell releases toxic granules to destroy pathogens and infected cells. Phagocytosis is another process and means that an innate immune cell engulfs a pathogen. It eats a pathogen. However, when an immune response requires a more specialized approach, the innate system recruits the adaptive immune system. One way of doing this is through the use of cytokines. So cytokines are small signaling molecules that send messages to other cells. The adaptive immune response is slower to mount an immune response, but it's more specialized in its approach. Also, a key difference, and a very important one, with the immune system is that the adaptive immune system can remember the harmful pathogens. So we don't get the same infection, disease, again, as the immune cells fight against this pathogen before we become ill. Adaptive immune response are carried out by white blood cells called lymphocytes, and that includes T and B cells. T cells work by recognizing a unique pattern of a pathogen. They then make clones of itself, and these clones release toxic granules that kills infected and abnormal cells. B cells work by, again, recognize a unique pattern of the pathogen. Then they make clones of itself, but instead of releasing toxic granules, they release antibodies. These antibodies can trap a particular pathogen and mark it for destruction. So let's review the role of the immune system leading to the inflammation and damage in lupus. So we start with someone who has susceptibility genes to lupus and have an environmental trigger. Just an example, UV light. These susceptibility genes will cause a defective tolerance mechanism. The environmental trigger will cause cell damage, which leads to death of the cell, known as apoptosis. Apoptosis, which is the cell death, exposes the inside of the cell, including parts of the nucleus, such as DNA and other proteins. The immune system of individuals who have this susceptibility to have lupus do not recognize this nuclear material, this DNA material, as self. In addition, the removal of this debris is defective in patients with lupus, leading to accumulation of the nuclear material that work as autoantigens and that will activate the innate system. So in the normal process, this apoptosis is part of the self-destruction mechanism that is normal in everybody, sorry. But what happens here is that the cleaning up that should happen after that does not take place as it should, and accumulates this material that is coming from this destruction of the cell. So this accumulation of the nuclear material will in fact activate the innate immune system, which will send the signs to activate the adaptive immune system. Remember, the cytokines is one way of doing that. T and B cells, they play an important role in both become very overreactive in lupus. Cells secrete pro-inflammatory cytokines and help B cells to generate autoantibodies. The B cells produce autoantibodies against the nuclear antigens called antinuclear antibodies. These antinuclear antibodies will bind with the nuclear antigens and form an immune complex. And this will travel in the blood to various organs and tissues where they are deposited and they stick to the blood vessel walls and cause a local inflammatory reaction. So this all will ultimately lead to health cell death, leading to symptoms and potentially some organ damage. And research is currently focused very much on these T and B cells pathways. So let's move on now for what's going on in terms of drug development. So as you as we saw in the previous slides, various immune cells and molecules interact during this pathogenesis or the origin of lupus. And those are the targets of drugs that we are in developing or trying to develop to treat lupus. The new treatment strategies under current clinical development for lupus target these inflammatory cytokines, their receptors, B and T cells, intracellular signal pathways, as well as various other targets. As you can see here, there's each of these pink boxes are potential targets and drugs being developed for lupus. So as you can see here, there is a lot of research ongoing, and given the complex of the nature of lupus, maybe more than one target may be needed or maybe more than one drug also may be needed to treat lupus. And here is an overview of what is going on in the treatment for lupus. So currently there are 24 treatments in development for lupus, 12 biologics and 12 small molecules. 19 treatments are in phase 2 clinical trials and 8 treatments are in phase 3 clinical trials. We know that we are lagging behind other autoimmune conditions in terms of available treatments. There is a big gap there. But this is an exciting time for research in lupus, as you can see for the number of trials and potential treatments ongoing. There is a vast amount of research going on and a lot of investment in the field and many clinical trials taking place across the world. In addition, we have learned quite a lot from previous research with lupus. We learn more about the origin of lupus or the pathophysiology. This is very important as when it comes to research, we need to be targeting the exactly pathways that affect lupus in order to find an effective treatment. Also, previous clinical trials have highlighted many observations and lessons that might help inform their future planning and execution. So there is a huge investment on lupus, and we researchers are not giving up. That's very clear. So fatigue can have a major impact on many aspects of people lives and well-being, and it can affect up to 8% of the people living with lupus. Looking at whether a treatment has an impact on fatigue is a focus area for us, and one that we are investing and exploring further. Our phase 2b CARRY study, we are studying fatigue as one of the assessments, and to see whether scenario mode could have an impact in fatigue. And also there are other studies ongoing, and in phase 3 studies ongoing that is also assessing fatigue, if fatigue can be impacted by the new treatment options. We have one phase 3 in the systemic lupus erythematosus and one phase 3 trial in lupus nephritis assessing that. And there are many clinical trials ongoing, as I already mentioned, and approximately 20,000 patients are currently enrolled in trials. So your participation is crucial in helping us to find new and effective treatments. Thank you for your ongoing collaboration to help us to achieve that. So another question that's, well, so what are the treatments that are near to approval stage? So currently there are two treatments that are under review by the FDA. Remember, this is one of the last steps of the drug development. So one of them is anifrolumab and the second one is voclosporin. And there are currently 8 treatments in phase 3 clinical trials, 5 for systemic lupus erythematosus and 3 for lupus nephritis. And also some phase 3 trials results are expecting quite soon, so next year. So this is belimumab in combination with rituximab and baricitinib, among others. So lupus is a quite complex disease, as we have seen, and involves many pathways of the immune system. But we have been learning a lot based on the previous experience with previous studies. And scientists are very exciting when they see a challenge, and we are doing quite a great progress on this one. A huge amount of progress has been made since we start. So as you have seen, there are 24 treatments in development for lupus, these in phase 2 and 3 trials, and with many different mechanisms of actions. And above all, thank you so much, everyone who continues to participate in clinical trials. Without your collaboration, none of this research would be possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you ever so much, Marilia. That was really, really interesting. And it looks like we've had lots of people who are also very interested, and I hope that you're prepared, because we've got possibly some tricky questions here for you. So we'll see how you get on. So I'll go through them sort of in the order that we received them, and I'll just say to everyone that the question and answer session is still open. So if you've got any questions that you think of while Marilia is answering some of the others, please feel free to submit them, and we will get around to those. So the first question we've had from somebody who has recently survived a totally unexpected myocardial infarction. And whilst they are not technically high risk for cardiovascular disease because of their other lifestyle factors, they are obviously at increased risk because of their SLE. And so they've experienced this accelerated atheroma. So what they've asked, because they're aware that there's been a study that suggests that statins may not be appropriate for everyone with lupus, that it may not necessarily work in controlling cholesterol. I'm not sure about that. Perhaps you can comment on that as well. But they've asked, are there any plans for tailor-made specific medications for lupus to help in the fight against cardiovascular disease, because we know that that's such an important risk factor for people with lupus?
Yes. So this is for sure a tricky question, for as you mentioned, and I can address partially the response. So one of the aspects that lupus has an increased incidence of cardiovascular disease is because there is an inflammation process going on, which may lead to the cardiovascular disease. So in general, we would expect that if the disease is well controlled, so the level of inflammation is well controlled with a drug that can do it, that we could potentially have an impact. But this is an hypothesis. I'm not talking about, we don't have these results. So this is what can be potentially expected if the drug can be really controlling the inflammation process, that would control as well, or maybe potentially have an impact on this cardiovascular disease.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Marilia. So the next question that we've had, I think this question is in response to part of the early part of your talk, where you were outlining the different stages of clinical trials and drug development. And I think you mentioned that the phase 3 trials would usually have around 1,000 to 5,000 patients involved, and someone's asked here, where would they be found? So obviously we know lupus is quite an uncommon condition. Where do you manage to recruit so many patients?
Yeah, so this is, we go everywhere on the world, and basically, and the phase 3 clinical trials usually goes to all the continents, and it includes Asia, Europe, and America, and this is where the patients are found. Of course, this takes some time. It's not from one day to the other, but the number of patients is required not only for the efficacy results, so to see if a drug works in improving the disease per se, but it's also to collect enough data for the safety aspects, as any medicine may have some side effects. And what we want to understand by the time that we would like to put this drug for a broader population is to understand if the side effects are acceptable in terms of what we call the benefit risk. So the risk is the side effects and the benefit is the efficacy of a drug. So this needs to be very positive. This needs to be a lot of benefit and very little risks or acceptable risks. It will always there is some risks in any medicine, but this needs to be in a level acceptable. And because some of these aspects or some of these side effects only show when you studying really a large population because they are rare or they're not so often seen, you need to go really in a very large population to have an idea in a controlled way, of course, because a clinical trial is a very controlled way where we assess the risks and the benefits before you can put the medication in the market and have a label for that. And this is also a requirement from the health authorities that will approve this medication. You need to have a certain number of patients exposed to the drug, exposed to the compound that can generate this safety data that is also very, very important in addition to the efficacy.
Excellent. Thank you for answering that. So another question that we've received here, I think the diagram that you had, which sort of showed the interaction between different cells and all the different targets, has captured some attention. And one question here is, do drugs use different molecules for each different type of lupus? So we know that there are different types of lupus, such as SLE, discoid lupus, or cutaneous lupus. Is that something that's seen, that there are different molecules used, or perhaps that's something for the future?
Well, it may be a same target can be, or a same molecule can use for more than one type of lupus. And we have a recent study with belimumab it's approved to treat systemic lupus erythematosus, and also there is studies ongoing and we show some benefit also for lupus nephritis. So it's not necessarily a different drug for all the different types of lupus. It might have some overlap, and the basics of the science is sometimes the same, and depend on the target that you are aiming, you might have an impact in the several types of lupus.
Okay, thank you for that. So comment here, someone's wanted to thank you for all of the excellent work that you're doing for lupus patients. So that's lovely of them.
Thank you.
One of the things that they've asked is, given that lupus is a lifelong illness, do you anticipate any problems from bringing about permanent changes to small parts of a very complex immune system? So could changing one aspect of the immune system cause unknown and unanticipated knock-on effects? Is that something that you're concerned about with these medications?
Yeah, so basically what we wish with the medications is kind of modulate or regulate, because there is an overreaction of the immune system in patients with lupus and other autoimmune disease. So the goal of this medicine is not to completely knock down the immune system, but it's trying to calm down this immune system somehow, to make this a little bit more tolerant, and help them to avoid attacking self, because I think that's the main problem of lupus. It's a mistake that the immune system do not recognize their own cells as self, and then it triggers all this process of activating the innate and then the adaptive immune system, causing all this, all these several steps that comes after that. So we are the new drugs, or the drugs in general, try to calm down the situation and regulate. Of course, if you are change the immune system somehow, there might be some risks, and this we know that any immunomodulatory or immunosuppressive therapy can have additional risks, like increased risk of infections. So because you are trying to calm down in one's hand the reactivity of lupus, but also the same system is also responsible for taking care of the pathogens that are real pathogens, the bacteria infections and so on. So this is it's very difficult, a fine line here, but there are risks. We cannot say there is none, and this is part of the risks that are assessed as well when we are developing a medicine. So this is exactly what I said. If the risk of infection is too high, then it does not serve for lupus, because you treat one thing, but then you complicate another one, and these patients are already with increased risk of infection. So this needs to be weighed, and then we see if the benefit that will bring it's much better than the risks that we are putting patients at. So this is it's a good example of the drug development, what I was trying to explain about the benefit risk.
Thank you, Marilia. So this next question, I'll just give a little bit of background before I ask it. So we know that some of the newer treatments which have become available for lupus, such as some of the biologics that are a bit more targeted and more expensive, they're not always available for everyone with lupus, because firstly, they'll encourage people to try sort of standard therapies, and then if they don't work, then they may offer those sort of biologic therapies. And I think one thing that comes across is that those therapies may not be available to people with diagnoses that are similar to lupus, but not exactly the same. So this person has asked, is it anticipated that some of the drugs that are on the way in the pipeline may be appropriate to support people with conditions like undifferentiated connective tissue disease, which is often considered to be a lupus-like condition, or probable lupus, or sometimes called incomplete lupus? So what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's another tricky one. So in the drug development, the rules are very standardized and clear. So to say that you can use a drug for a different indication, you need to study this different indication. So if a drug is being studied for lupus, you will end up with a label for lupus. And there is no way, this is an off-label use if it's not lupus. So if the other disease that may be similar, or maybe it is like the way to lupus also, that some may say, they need to be studied in this condition, so then can be approved and then can have all these steps. It's an extremely regulated situation, the development of any drug for any condition. So we cannot claim that if a drug works for lupus, would work for other similar disease if not studied properly for this similar disease.
Thank you very much. Now, I've got a couple of questions on here which I'd love to address, but sometimes they may be a bit too specific to an individual case. And really, I think in some cases it may be about speaking to your personal consultant about these. I mean, I don't know if Marilia is sort of happy to address one sort of question here. Someone's mentioned that they've got lupus nephritis and that they experience a lot of swelling. Is there anything that you're able to suggest about swelling, and whether if someone sort of reaches a certain class of lupus nephritis, does that mean that they're permanently at that stage, or can it get better? Is that something that you can answer, or is that something that the person needs to ask their consultant?
Yeah, I would suggest to discuss this with the treating physician. It's a very specific, and the swelling might have different causes. So it's really very particular potentially for the case. So I would suggest that this is discussed with the physician that's treating this this person.
Well, thank you very much for that question. I will just say we do have some information about lupus in the kidneys on our website, including a booklet. And if there is interest in learning more about how the kidneys can be affected by lupus, then we can look at doing a virtual session like this specifically about lupus in the kidneys in the future. So thank you for your question, and that will definitely help us shape what we're doing with future sessions like this. So again, someone else has asked here, does lupus affect the gastric system? Someone thinks that that their consultant thinks they may have gastrointestinal lupus. Is that a common?
So it's not a common per se, but lupus can virtually affect any organ in the system. It's the body can produce autoantibodies and the cytotoxic cells in any tissue. So virtually any system can be affected by lupus. It's not the most common manifestation, but it's not impossible.
Thank you for that. And I think that that's something that we always see with lupus, that everybody has a range of different symptoms, and it can be really helpful to connect with other people through things like our support groups and our forum to find other people with similar symptoms, because otherwise it's just too varied between people. So perhaps have a look on our forum that you can find on the homepage, and you might find other people who have gastric involvement with their lupus. So the next question that we've got here, so someone's asked, why do symptoms of a flare seem to evolve over time? So again, this is quite interesting, because this may be different between different people as well, because flares may present very individually. So I wonder if maybe you can talk a little bit more generally about flares and how they occur and why they may be different from person to person.
Well, that's another tough one, because it's so heterogeneous, lupus, and one person can be completely different from another person on the type of symptoms and when the flare occurs. What it's known is that there are some potentially triggers for flare, like sun exposure is one of the triggers. So, and some might be more affected than others from this specifically trigger. So, I could just maybe give a more general statement, and maybe this is more specifically discussed with again with the treating physician. But the general recommendations, like using sun protection, this would be applicable for everyone, because who is more at risk of having a flare because they have been under sun exposure than others, we don't know. So this is maybe avoiding the flare is what is known is potentially a good start, let's say. But of course, there are so many different and so many reasons for flare, because flare could be worsening in the skin, but could be also worsening in the kidney. So how to treat it and how to handle this may be absolutely different from one to the other. I'm sorry, I cannot give a very specific answer to this one because it's quite broad. I would just suggest that in general, I try to avoid some risk factors that may have an impact in flare.
That's great. Thank you, Marilia. So this next question, it's something that everyone sort of is a hot topic at the moment, relating to COVID-19, obviously. So this person has noticed how similar some of the symptoms are for people who experience long COVID. So, you know, feelings of fatigue and continuing symptoms after they've recovered from the virus. And how similar that can be to SLE. And so they've asked whether you envisage an overlap of any of those phase 3 or phase 2 medications looking at fatigue. And do you think that those will also perhaps be used for people with long COVID as well?
Well, that's an interesting question. There are some overlap between COVID and lupus for sure. So you probably have heard this cytokine storm, and it's a hyperreactivity of the body. Not it's against the virus, but it's not really the virus causing it, but it's the immune system that is in the COVID situation. The immune system is out; it's too reactive. And this is what caused some of the pathology in COVID, which is very similar in the sense to what happens with lupus. So maybe some, and then the fatigue question is, it's a multifactorial thing. So the fatigue, it's maybe related to the inflammatory process in lupus, and maybe related to other conditions like patient has pain and cannot sleep well, and then it just accumulates this inflammation with some symptoms and this origin of fatigue. So there is an expectation if we can again decrease the level of inflammation or this autoreactivity, that we will have an impact as well in symptoms like fatigue in the long run. And if that would be used for COVID, I think that's a good question. I'm not sure if someone had specifically thought about COVID, fatigue, and same medications, but yeah, that's a very interesting question.
Okay, so we've got time for, I think, for 2 more questions. So let's quick look at this one. So this is a really interesting one. So somebody has said that they've had very good results at managing their lupus with rituximab, but it became apparent that it caused some long-term side effects with general immunity. And what they've asked is, do you ever go back to tweak and redesign existing medications and sort of look at the design of the pathway of that drug and adjust it to make it less common to cause side effects and things like that?
Yes, absolutely. And this is done in the very early phases. Remember when we have this drug discovery? So this is the first step of the drug development in the molecule. So there are things that are possible to be done in the very early phase of the labs, and change the shape of a molecule or adding some radicals to the molecules that may increase the efficacy, and importantly, may also have a better safety profile, meaning that the patients may be less side effects. And we learn from one drug to the other. So I can give you the example of cenerimod. So cenerimod is S1P receptor modulator. And as we know, there are some others S1P receptor modulators in the market to treat multiple sclerosis, and with some side effects that's well known in the class. So when cenerimod was in this discovery phase, what the company tried to do is to improve the way the molecule, the shape of the molecule, and have some aspects of this molecule to increase the safety of the medicine. Of course, this is the first step, and then we need to test this if this translates into humans and translate into the patients. But this can be done. We go back to the lab, we do some tricks, as you mentioned, and try to improve either the efficacy or the safety. But usually this is done the very beginning. So we have some information of the compound, and we do this in the very beginning, not after starting a trial, because when we start a trial with patients, as you have seen, we have very long way before we go first in humans, so that we could avoid having to go back. And usually if the things do not go well, the drug is stopped, and maybe this is all reformulated and back to square zero, basically.
Thanks very much. So I've actually got a question that I've wanted answered for a while. We, within the lupus community, have some ridiculous words to try to pronounce all the time. Whenever we are learning about the various medications used in lupus, we have to try to get our tongues around things like hydroxychloroquine or mycophenolate mofetil or belimumab or rituximab. Where do these names actually come from? How do you come up with them? And why are they so hard to pronounce?
Yes, I can say I'm not a native speaker, as you probably have noticed. I'm sure about that, and I have problems as well with some of the aspects. But about the drugs, it's very interesting. It's a very complex, in fact, how we name the drugs. So we have the generic name and the brand name of a drug. So the generic name, it's usually is made. So there are some rules and very complex rules to make this generic name. So let's take the example of belimumab. So the mab is it's mandatory, let's put it this way, to have in a compound that is made of monoclonal antibodies. So this is what the mab is about. It's monoclonal, the M, antibodies AB. So every drug that is made of monoclonal antibodies have at the end of the word mab. And then the first part is usually there is some more freedom, but it's try to describe one of the mechanisms that of action of the drug somehow. And then there is the brand name. So the brand name is the name of that you see in the box of the medicine. So Benlysta for belimumab. Let's use the same example. And this is a long process, so that the company. So there is something to do probably with the generic name, but also it should be a name that, in principle, should be easy to pronounce, or easier than the generic name usually, and has to be a name that is pronounceable everywhere, so every language can pronounce more or less the same way and understand it. And also the name should not have a meaning, because sometimes we don't know in other language, maybe something that is just there is no meaning in English, there is a completely different, maybe even a not nice meaning in other language. So this also needs to be tested everywhere where the company is planning to sell the medicine, basically that. And there are some rules, there is a lot of approvals from the authorities, and including the WHO. So it's enormous and takes forever, a lot of time to make this happen. And sometimes it's not ideal. As you said, the names are very complex, and some are very, very tricky to pronounce for ourselves as well. I can tell you, it's not a privilege of yours.
Yeah, I had no idea that there were so many rules involved in naming a drug, so that's really, really interesting. Thank you. So I've just got one more question, if that's all right, and it's again about COVID-19 and everything that's been going on. I mean, we've heard from you that there are a couple of treatments that are sort of at the stage of getting FDA approval, and some other drugs that are in sort of phase 3 trials at the moment. What sort of impact do you think COVID-19 has had on the timelines for new drugs becoming available for lupus? Do you think it's going to have a significant delay?
Well, unfortunately, yes. So, we can tell, you know, about ourselves. So we are running a phase 2b study, and certainly the COVID had an impact. So we have not halted the study because we could continue to enroll, but however, there was some places where or some countries, or maybe some establishments or some sites of research that had been very much affected by the COVID. Just an example, one of our research sites, they are one of the sites that are receiving the patients with COVID. So all the staff, all the doctors, nurses, and all the staff working in the hospital needs to be dedicated to the COVID patients and not for clinical research. So they stop enrolling new patients in the study in this specific site because of the COVID situation. But this is changing, and we are really hoping. It caused delays everywhere, not only for us, but I think everywhere. If you go to clinicaltrials.gov, you can see a lot of trials that had an impact on the timelines. This is really unfortunate, and we are trying. So as soon as the site is or the country is in the better situation, they start to enroll again. But at the moment, we don't understand how much this delay is, but certainly has impacted. And well, this is the reality, and we don't know how long this will take.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So there, I think we've not had any more questions come through, but I'd like to say thank you so much to everyone who has submitted their questions. There were some really excellent questions there that expanded on this topic, so thank you so much for that. I'd like to say a massive thank you to Marilia for giving up her time and giving an excellent presentation and managing to tackle some of those very tricky questions.
You got me.
And I'd also like to say a really big thank you to Jessica and Sebastian, who are behind the scenes making everything work properly and making you see the right people at the right time. So they've been silently ploughing away and working on that. So thank you to them.
Thank you. Pleasure.
And thank you also to everyone at Idorsia for helping us provide this virtual event for people with lupus today. There's been some last minute panics trying to work out how to get the technology to work, but we've all learned it now and taken on some new skills. So we'll look forward to doing this again in the future, which we are planning to do. We have got plans for another talk with Idorsia. We haven't cemented a date yet, but we'll be announcing the details very soon. And we'll be talking about the importance of involvement in research. So how you can get involved in research, why it's so crucial, what role it really has. So that will be really interesting, and that will probably be either at the end of this month or the start of November. So keep your eyes peeled for that. We've also got other virtual events, so keep your eye on the Lupus UK website and social media pages to learn about those. And we'll also be updating our information and guidance relating to COVID-19 for the UK. We're aware that new measures are being announced today that will affect England. And so our guidance will be updated to reflect those in the next couple of days. And if you've got any questions, send them through to us or give us a call and we'll do our best to help you out. But for the meantime, I just want to thank you all again for joining us. I hope you're all keeping well, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.